Please be advised, this story delves into themes of psychological distress and existential dread. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine waking up one morning, the sun barely pushing through your blinds, and you walk into your bathroom still half asleep. You splash cold water on your face, reach for a towel, and then you look up. You look into the mirror, expecting to see your own eyes, your own face, the familiar lines of your morning self. But there's nothing. Just the tiled wall behind you. Your reflection, the very image of yourself, is gone. Vanished. That impossible, terrifying moment is exactly where our story begins. Michael didn't scream. He didn't even gasp. He just stood there, dripping water onto the pristine white tile, his mind scrambling for a logical explanation. A dream, obviously. He was still asleep, caught in some particularly vivid nightmare. He squeezed his eyes shut, hard, pressing the heels of his hands against them until bright spots danced behind his eyelids. He counted to 3. 1, 2, 3. He opened them slowly, cautiously. The mirror in front of him, a simple rectangular piece of glass above his vanity, still showed only the wall, the faint floral pattern of the wallpaper, the small smudge he'd meant to clean off the light switch, a stray hair caught on the edge of the medicine cabinet. Everything but Michael. His mind, usually so orderly, so grounded in the tangible, began to fray at the edges. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't a distorted angle. He was standing directly in front of the mirror, less than a foot away, and there was absolutely no trace of him. He raised a hand slowly, watching the movement in his peripheral vision. His fingers, his knuckles, the slight tremor he couldn't suppress. He poked at the glass, his fingertip meeting the cool surface. Nothing. No ghostly image, no faint outline. It was like he was a phantom, an invisible man, but only to this specific piece of reflective glass. Panic, cold and sharp, began to crawl up his spine. He backed away, bumping into the counter. He spun around, his eyes darting to the bedroom window. The glass was old, slightly wavy, but it always offered a faint, distorted glimpse of himself when the light hit it just right. He leaned in, pressing his face close to the pane. Nothing. Only the street outside, the neighbor's aging oak tree, a faint glimmer of morning dew on the lawn. He practically stumbled out of the bathroom, his heart hammering against his ribs. Emily, his girlfriend, was still asleep, a soft hum escaping her lips. Thank God. He couldn't face her yet, not with this impossible horror unfolding. He needed a moment to process, to rationalize. This had to be some bizarre temporary anomaly. A trick of perception, a fleeting neurological glitch. He found his phone, its screen a dark, unreflective slab. He opened the camera app, switching it to selfie mode. He stared at the screen, holding it up, expecting to see his image appear. The camera was working, capturing the beige wall behind him, the rumpled sheets of the bed, Emily's sleeping form. But when he angled it towards himself, the screen simply showed whatever was behind him, as if he wasn't there. As if the camera lens was looking through him. A whimper escaped his throat. This wasn't a mirror problem. This was a him problem. He was invisible to any surface designed to reflect light, to capture an image. He tried his laptop screen, the polished surface of the coffee table, even the shiny toaster in the kitchen. Each time the same chilling result. No Michael. His mind raced, desperately searching for a precedent, a logical explanation. Was he dreaming? Still? He pinched himself hard enough to sting. He felt it. This was real. He was awake. He was here. But he wasn't there in any reflection. He started to pace, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. What did this even mean? Was he a vampire? He scoffed at the thought, a dry, humorless sound. That was absurd, a fictional construct. But then what else explained it? He wasn't dead, he was breathing, moving, thinking. He felt normal. More than normal, he felt acutely, terrifyingly alive. He tried to calm himself, to force his racing thoughts into some semblance of order. Okay, step 1, don't panic. Step 2, verify. Again, he needed more mirrors. Bigger mirrors. Public mirrors. He dressed quickly, his hands clumsy with the buttons of his shirt. He grabbed his keys, his wallet, the familiar weight of them grounding him slightly. He glanced at Emily one last time, a protective urge washing over him. He couldn't tell her yet, not until he understood. How could he even begin to explain something so utterly beyond comprehension? She'd think he was losing his mind. And maybe, just maybe, he was. His small sedan felt like a safe haven, a familiar cocoon. He pulled out of his driveway, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. Empty. The side mirrors. Empty. He could see the cars behind him, the houses he passed, the familiar street signs. But no hint of his own face, no glimpse of his hair, his shoulder, his arm resting on the door. It was profoundly disorienting, like driving a ghost car with a ghost driver. He drove aimlessly for a few minutes, his mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. He needed a public place, somewhere with lots of reflective surfaces. A department store. That was it. He could discreetly check himself in various mirrors, confirm this wasn't some localized defect in his own home. He parked in a crowded lot, the mundane sounds of shopping carts and distant chatter, a stark contrast to the silent terror inside him. He walked into the department store, the bright fluorescent lights almost blinding. He headed straight for the men's clothing section, where rows of full-length mirrors lined the walls. He approached the first mirror, pretending to browse a rack of shirts. He edged closer, his heart pounding in his ears. He was there. His clothes were visible, the fabric draped over an invisible form. The shirt he was holding, the jeans he was wearing. But inside the shirt, above the collar where his head should be, nothing. Just the racks of clothes behind him. The bustling shoppers, moving oblivious to the impossible void in front of the mirror. He moved to another mirror, then another. The same horrifying reality. He was a gaping hole in the visual landscape. He walked past a cosmetics counter, catching sight of a woman applying lipstick, her reflection perfectly clear. Her eyes met his in the mirror, and for a split second, he felt a surge of hope. She saw him. But then her gaze drifted, unconcerned, past the empty space where his face should have been, back to her own reflection. She hadn't seen him in the mirror. She had seen him through the mirror, as if he were transparent. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real. And he was utterly, terrifyingly alone in this reality. He stumbled out of the store, the bright lights now feeling like a harsh interrogation. He needed to talk to someone. He couldn't keep this to himself. Emily. He had to tell Emily. He drove home in a daze, the world outside his car windows blurring. He burst through the front door, calling her name. Emily. Emily, wake up. She emerged from the bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes, a soft frown on her face. Michael? What is it? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. He grabbed her hands, his grip tight. Worse, Emily. Much, much worse. I need you to look at something. Come with me. He pulled her into the bathroom, his voice a frantic whisper. Look. Look in the mirror. Emily, still groggy, blinked at him, then at the mirror. She saw her own reflection, her messy blonde hair, her sleepy eyes. Okay, what about it? Is there a spider or something? She laughed softly, trying to lighten the mood, but Michael's face was etched with pure terror. No, Emily. Not for you. For me. Look at me. And then look in the mirror. He stood directly in front of the glass, gesturing wildly. Do you see me? In the mirror? Tell me you see me. Emily looked at him, then at the mirror. Her brow furrowed. She looked back at him, then back at the mirror again, more carefully this time. Her smile slowly faded. A puzzled expression replaced it. Michael, what are you talking about? Of course I see you. You're right there. She pointed at the empty space where his reflection should have been. No, he cried, his voice cracking. No, you don't. You see the wall behind me. You see through me. Don't you see? My reflection is gone. I'm not there. Emily stepped closer to the mirror, tilting her head. She saw the wallpaper. She saw the medicine cabinet. And she saw Michael standing in front of it, his face pale, his eyes wide with a desperate plea. But she didn't see him in the mirror. She saw him standing in front of the mirror, and the mirror itself showed only what was behind him. Her eyes widened, not with terror but with dawning concern. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Michael, honey, you're scaring me. You're shaking. What's going on? My reflection, Emily. It's gone. I looked in the mirror this morning, and it wasn't there. I tried my phone, the car, the department store. Nothing. I'm not there. He was practically yelling now, his voice raw with desperation. Emily gently guided him to sit on the edge of the tub. Okay, Michael. Just breathe. You're clearly very stressed. Maybe you're just seeing things a little differently right now. It happens when you're overwhelmed." She tried to smile reassuringly, but her eyes held a flicker of worry. "You think I'm crazy," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You think I'm hallucinating." "No, of course not crazy," she said, her voice soft but her gaze avoiding his. "Just maybe you need to calm down. Let's get you some breakfast. You probably just need to eat something." He pulled away from her, standing up abruptly. "You still don't see it, do you? You still don't believe me?" He walked back to the mirror, pointing at the empty space. "Look, it's not there. I'm not there. What am I going to do, Emily? What am I going to do?" He stared into the glass, into the void where his face should have been, and for the first time a profound, chilling thought solidified in his mind. This wasn't just an absence. This was an erasure. And he had no idea how or why or what it truly meant to be a man without a reflection. But he knew with a certainty that chilled him to his very soul, that his life would never, ever be the same. The words echoed in his own mind, a pronouncement of a terrifying, irreversible truth. His life would never be the same. The bathroom mirror, once a mundane portal to his everyday self, now reflected only the sterile white tiles behind him, the chrome fixtures, the faint outline of the window across the hall. But where his face should have been, where his body should have stood, there was an empty space. A void where a man once was. He stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. This couldn't be real. It was a trick of the light, a waking nightmare, a sudden, inexplicable hallucination. He splashed cold water on his face, rubbing his eyes until they ached. He squeezed them shut, counting to 10, then 20, then 100. When he opened them again, the mirror remained stubbornly vacant of his image. Panic, raw and visceral, seized him. He lunged for the small, ornate hand mirror his grandmother had given him. A heavy silver piece kept on the vanity. He held it up, his hand trembling so violently the glass rattled. Nothing. Just the bathroom wall behind him, distorted slightly by the curved surface. He ran from the bathroom, his bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. A desperate, irrational hope spurring him on. In the living room, a large framed mirror hung above the fireplace, a gift from an ex-girlfriend, chosen for its antique charm. He stood before it, breathless, his eyes wide and searching. The intricate designs on the frame were clear, the reflection of the sofa and coffee table perfectly rendered. But his own silhouette, the shape of his head and shoulders, was conspicuously absent. It was as if he were a ghost, an invisible man, standing in a room full of solid things. He tried his phone. He opened the camera app, flipping it to selfie mode. He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the shutter button. The front-facing camera showed the wall behind him, the faint glow of the morning sun through the blinds. He slowly raised the phone, pointing it directly at his face. The screen remained blank, a live feed of the empty space where he stood. Not a flicker, not a shadow. No image registered. He took a photo anyway. When he checked the gallery, it was a perfectly clear picture of the wall, unmarred by any trace of him. His mind screamed, a cacophony of denial and terror. He paced the apartment, his thoughts racing, colliding, trying to find a logical explanation for the utterly illogical. A rare medical condition? A bizarre psychological break? Was he dreaming? He pinched himself hard. The sharp pain was undeniably real. He wasn't dreaming. He wasn't hallucinating. This was happening. The terrible truth began to sink in, cold and heavy as a stone in his gut. He was invisible to mirrors, to cameras, to any surface that should reflect light back to him. He was a man without an image, a man without a reflection. The silence of the apartment pressed in on him, amplifying the frantic beat of his own heart. What did this mean? How was he supposed to live like this? How could he face the world, knowing this impossible, terrifying secret? Who would believe him? They would think he was insane. They would lock him away. Or worse, they would see him as a freak, a monster, something unnatural. A wave of profound isolation washed over him. He couldn't tell anyone. Not his best friend, David. Not his sister, Emily. Definitely not his parents. The fear of their reaction, of the pity or the horror in their eyes, was almost as debilitating as the phenomenon itself. He had to keep this a secret. At all costs. The immediate implications crashed down on him. Shaving. How was he going to shave without seeing his face? He ran a hand over his chin, feeling the stubble. He always prided himself on being well-groomed. Dressing. How could he tell if his tie was straight, if his clothes matched, if his hair wasn't a tangled mess? He walked back to the bathroom, staring at the empty mirror. He tried to mimic his usual shaving routine, his hand moving tentatively, guided only by touch and memory. The razor felt alien, dangerous against his unseen skin. He nicked himself, a small sting above his jawline. A tiny bead of blood appeared, dark against his pale skin. He couldn't see the cut itself, just feel it. The sheer absurdity of the situation, the sudden impossible handicap, threatened to overwhelm him. His morning routine, once a mindless series of actions, was now a minefield of potential errors and constant reminders of his new reality. He had to rely on memory, on touch, on a terrifying leap of faith that he looked presentable. It was exhausting, frustrating, and deeply, profoundly humiliating. As the initial shock began to recede, a chilling question started to form in the back of his mind. Why? What could possibly cause something like this? His thoughts drifted back, searching for an explanation, for a trigger, for anything that could shed light on this impossible transformation. He reviewed the past few days, weeks, months. Nothing. His life had been utterly mundane, routine, predictable. Then a flicker. A faint, unsettling memory, like a half-forgotten dream. A strange, dimly lit shop he'd stumbled upon a few months ago, tucked away on a side street he'd never noticed before. An antique shop, filled with curiosities, dusty tomes, and objects that seemed to hum with an unspoken history. He had been drawn in by a peculiar sign, half hidden by overgrown ivy, that simply read, "Oddities and Exchanges." He remembered a man behind the counter, an old man with eyes like polished obsidian, and a smile that didn't quite reach them. A quiet voice, a peculiar offer. Something about a unique item, a rare opportunity. He'd been feeling restless at the time, unfulfilled, seeking something different, something to shake up the monotony. Had he bought something? Traded something? The memory was hazy, indistinct, like trying to grasp smoke. He remembered a feeling of strange exhilaration, a sense of making a significant, yet ultimately harmless transaction. A contract, perhaps? A signature? He couldn't recall the specifics, only the lingering sensation of something momentous having occurred, followed by a swift return to his ordinary life, where the memory had faded into the background, dismissed as a quirky encounter. But now, the fragments of that memory clawed at the edges of his consciousness, refusing to be ignored. Oddities and exchanges. The words echoed in his mind with new, horrifying significance. What exactly had he exchanged? What had that unsettling man taken from him? He ran a hand over his face again, feeling the contours, the stubble, the small cut. He knew what he looked like intimately. He had seen his reflection every day of his life. But now that visual confirmation was gone. It wasn't just an image lost. It was a fundamental anchor to his identity, to his very existence in the physical world. He was still Michael, still the same man, but now he was also something profoundly different. Something unseen. Something that defied natural law. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through him, colder and deeper than before. This wasn't just a bizarre inconvenience. It was a fundamental shift in reality, and the chilling possibility that he himself, in some moment of foolish curiosity or fleeting desire, had somehow caused it, bought it, or sold something precious for it, made his blood run cold. He was a man without a reflection, and the dawning horror was that he might have traded it away, unknowingly, in a bargain with the unseen. He stumbled back from the shattered glass, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The broken shards glittered on the bathroom floor, each a tiny, mocking eye reflecting everything but him. He looked down at his hands, then brought them up to his face, pinching his cheek, slapping himself. The pain was real. The cold sweat beading on his forehead was real. But the mirror, every single fragment of it, showed only the wall behind him, the chipped paint, the flickering overhead light. Nothing. A guttural sound halfway between a sob and a choked scream tore from his throat. He wasn't hallucinating. This wasn't a nightmare he could wake from. He wasn't just seeing no reflection. He had no reflection. It was a terrifying, undeniable truth. He scrambled out of the bathroom, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his mind racing through impossible explanations. A rare medical condition? A trick of the light? a bizarre optical illusion affecting every single reflective surface in his apartment? He flung open the door to his bedroom, his eyes darting to the full-length mirror leaning against the wall. He stood before it, rigid, his arms hanging limply at his sides. The mirror showed his rumpled bed, the stack of canvases in the corner, the half-empty coffee mug on his nightstand. But where his body should have been, there was only the wall. He swayed, feeling lightheaded, the floor tilting beneath him. He moved to the window, pressing his face against the cool glass. The streetlights below cast long shadows, and the faint glow from a neighbor's TV flickered in the dark pane. He could see the faint outline of the buildings opposite, the distant gleam of car headlights. But again, nothing of himself. Not a hint of his face, his eyes, his frantic breath fogging the glass. It was as if he were a ghost, an invisible man, yet he could feel the solid ground beneath his feet, the rough texture of his shirt, the tremor in his hands. He ran his fingers through his hair, then down his jawline, trying to grasp onto his own tangible reality, but the lack of visual confirmation was like a constant, chilling denial of his existence. Panic began to set in, a cold, suffocating blanket. He tried to think, to rationalize. He was an artist, a man who saw the world in light and shadow, in form and color. He understood optics, perspective. This defied every law of physics he knew. His mind, usually a whirlwind of creative ideas, was now a barren wasteland of terror. He thought of old myths of vampires and soulless beings, of creatures that cast no shadow, no reflection. A shiver, colder than any winter wind, coursed through him. Was he becoming one of them? No, that was insane. He was a man, a living, breathing human being. Or was he? He spent the next few hours in a feverish, desperate search. He pulled out his laptop, his fingers trembling as he typed increasingly bizarre queries into the search bar. No reflection, lost reflection. Why can't I see myself in a mirror? The results were a dizzying mix of folklore, psychological conditions, and optical illusions, none of which fit his terrifying reality. He read about Cotard's syndrome, where people believe they are dead or missing internal organs. He read about rare instances of a specific type of glass that could distort reflections, but that was clearly not what he was experiencing. Every mirror, every window, every polished surface in his home was a gaping void where he should have been. The horror wasn't just the absence, it was the implication. The dawning, sickening realization that this wasn't an accident, a trick, or a medical anomaly. The memory of his desperate ambition, his all-consuming hunger for success, for a life beyond his current struggles, began to gnaw at him. He remembered the long nights spent staring at his blank canvases, the crushing weight of his artistic failures, the endless bills piling up. He remembered the envy he felt for others, the burning desire to be someone, to create something magnificent, to be recognized, to be wealthy. He'd wished for it with every fiber of his being. He'd craved it. Had he, in a moment of profound despair or unchecked ambition, whispered a wish into the void? Had he unknowingly made a pact? The idea was absurd, fantastical, yet it was the only explanation that even began to make sense of the impossible. What could he have offered? What could be so valuable that it would demand his very reflection? His sense of self, his soul, his connection to the tangible world? The thought made him gag. He remembered a particularly bleak night, about 6 months ago. He'd been working on a painting, a portrait he'd hoped would be his breakthrough, but it was just dead, lifeless. He'd stared at it, then at his own reflection in the window, seeing only the tired, defeated man he felt he was becoming. He'd slammed his fist on the table, a raw, primal scream trapped in his throat, and he remembered wishing, with a ferocity that bordered on madness, for anything to change. He'd wished for success, for recognition, for an escape from the suffocating mediocrity of his life. He'd wished for it so intensely that it had felt like a physical wrenching in his gut, a tearing sensation. He'd thought, I'd give anything for this to work. Anything. At the time it had just been a desperate thought, a fleeting emotional outburst. But now, the memory was a chilling echo, reverberating in the silence of his reflectionless home. Had those words, those silent pleas, been heard? Had they been interpreted as an offer? And if so, what had he received in return? What success had he achieved in the last 6 months that could possibly justify this monstrous trade? He racked his brain. Nothing. His art was still struggling. His finances were still tight. He was still the same struggling artist, only now he was also a man without a reflection. The realization brought a fresh wave of terror. If he had made a bargain, he hadn't even received his side of the deal. He was just empty, robbed. The thought of facing the outside world, of interacting with other people, became unbearable. How would he explain this? How could he hide it? Every reflective surface, every shop window, every polished car would expose his terrifying secret. The fear of discovery was almost as potent as the fear of his own condition. He was a human being, yet he was marked by an invisible brand, a void where his image should be. He tried to look at his phone to distract himself, but even the dark screen, when powered off, showed only a faint, distorted image of his room, not him. He couldn't escape it. It was everywhere, the constant, chilling reminder of his absence. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a loneliness that went deeper than any he had ever experienced. He was disconnected, not just from his own image, but from a fundamental aspect of human existence. He stumbled into the kitchen, his stomach churning, and grabbed a glass of water. He raised it to his lips, his gaze falling on the dark, still surface of the liquid. He leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. The water too showed nothing. Just the ceiling, the light, the faint outline of the cabinets. His face, his hands, his body. They simply weren't there. He splashed the water on his face, the cold shock doing little to quell the rising hysteria. The bargain, the unseen, the price. The words echoed in his mind, a terrifying mantra. He had unwittingly entered into something he couldn't comprehend, and now he was paying a price he couldn't afford. He was a man trapped in a waking nightmare, a prisoner in his own skin, his identity stripped away, one fundamental piece at a time. The real horror was not just the loss of his reflection, but the dawning dreadful certainty that this was only the beginning. He had traded something, and the entity that had taken it was still out there, lurking, waiting, and he had no idea what it wanted next. The silence of his reflection-less apartment pressed in on him, a heavy, suffocating weight promising more. David stumbled back from the bathroom mirror, his breath catching in his throat. His mind, still reeling from the impossible void where his face should have been, tried desperately to conjure an explanation. A trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by stress? But no matter how many times he blinked, how many angles he tried, the polished glass remained stubbornly empty of him. Only the faint, distorted image of the shower curtain and the edge of the sink stared back, a cruel mockery of reality. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cool glass, half expecting to feel something give way, to find a hidden panel or a trick screen. But it was solid, unyielding, and he was gone. The first few hours were a blur of panic denial and frantic experimentation. He ran to every reflective surface in his apartment, the small mirror in the hallway, the darkened screen of his laptop, even the polished surface of his coffee table. Each one confirmed the horrifying truth. He was invisible to reflections. It was as if he had ceased to exist in that particular dimension of light and glass. As dawn broke, painting the city in hues of weak gray and pale gold, a new kind of terror began to set in. This wasn't just a bizarre occurrence. It was a fundamental shift in his reality. How could he live like this? How could he face the world, knowing that a part of him, an essential part of his identity, was simply gone? The practicalities hit him first. Shaving. He stood in front of the empty mirror, razor in hand, a phantom limb of dread gripping him. How was he supposed to do this? He had to rely on touch, on memory, guiding the blade across his jawline with an unsettling awareness of his own blind spots. Each stroke was a gamble, a terrifying dance with the unknown, the fear of nicking himself intensified by the inability to see the damage. He finished, his face feeling raw and uncertain, a profound sense of incompleteness settling over him. Getting dressed was equally disorienting. He chose his clothes by feel, by habit, trusting that the shirt wasn't inside out, that his hair wasn't a tangled mess. He felt like an actor rehearsing a scene without a mirror, relying solely on his internal monologue and the hope that he looked presentable. But the hope was paper-thin, easily shattered by the knowledge that no matter how perfectly he arranged his appearance, no mirror would ever confirm it. He was a man without visual feedback, a ghost in his own skin. Leaving the apartment felt like stepping onto a stage blindfolded. Every shop window, every car mirror, every reflective surface on a building became a potential trap, a reminder of his absence. He found himself instinctively averting his gaze, a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of his head as he walked, trying to avoid catching sight of the void where he should be. He saw other people, their reflections shimmering back at them from storefronts, confident and whole. He felt like an imposter, a glitch in the matrix of everyday life. He tried to act normal. He went to his job as an accountant, sitting in his cubicle, typing numbers into spreadsheets. But the metallic sheen of his monitor, the polished surface of his desk, the glass partition of his office, they all screamed his secret. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone would notice, that a colleague would glance at a reflective surface and see nothing where David should be, exposing his impossible truth. He ate lunch alone, picking at his food, the polished chrome of the cafeteria's coffee machine a constant, unsettling presence. The psychological toll was immense. He started to question his own existence. If he couldn't see himself, was he truly there? Was he slowly fading, becoming less real with each passing moment? The world felt muted, less vibrant, as if a layer of reality had been peeled away, leaving him in a slightly off-kilter, colorless dimension. He felt a profound sense of disassociation, as if he were watching his own life unfold from a distance, a detached observer of a body that no longer truly belonged to him. Sleep offered no escape. His dreams became fractured, fragmented glimpses of impossible reflections. He saw himself in a funhouse mirror, stretched and distorted, only to wake in a cold sweat, the image dissolving into the familiar void. He saw himself as a child, laughing, chasing his own shimmering reflection in a puddle, only to have the water turn black and swallow him whole. Desperate, David started searching online. He typed in bizarre phrases: "Man loses reflection," "sold my shadow," "supernatural mirror curse." The results were a mix of folklore, urban legends, and fringe conspiracy theories. He found stories of ancient curses, of deals with dark entities for power or knowledge, of reflections being stolen as tokens or sources of power. None of it offered a concrete solution, but it painted a chilling picture of an unseen world, a world where such a transaction, however impossible it seemed, might actually be real. One forum, an obscure corner of the internet dedicated to the paranormal, had a thread titled "The Mirror Trade." It spoke of an entity, nameless and ancient, that could offer incredible boons in exchange for something intangible, something deeply personal. The reflections were mentioned, not as mere images, but as extensions of the soul, gateways to perception, echoes of identity. The posts warned that such trades were never truly equal, and the price, though seemingly simple at first, always escalated. The entity, it claimed, didn't just take what it wanted. It used the void it created to exert a creeping influence, slowly twisting the remaining reality of its victim. David felt a cold dread seep into his bones. Creeping influence. He thought back to the subtle shifts, the feeling of being watched, the strange silence that now seemed to follow him. Was this what they meant? That evening, as he walked home, the city lights blurred around him. He passed a bus stop, and for a fleeting second, in the dark glass of the shelter, he thought he saw something. Not his reflection, but a flicker, a distortion, a ripple in the glass where he should have been. It was gone before he could properly register it, but it left him with an unsettling certainty. He wasn't alone in his reflectionless existence. The entity was still present, its unseen tendrils perhaps already reaching into the edges of his perception. He tried to call his best friend Mark. He needed to talk to someone, anyone, to articulate the impossible weight crushing him. But as he dialed, his finger hovered over the call button. How could he explain this? "Hey Mark, guess what? I sold my reflection to a shadowy entity, and now I don't appear in mirrors." It sounded insane. Mark, practical and grounded, would either think he was having a breakdown or playing a sick joke. He couldn't risk it. The isolation was absolute. He started noticing other things. Small, almost imperceptible details. The way the light seemed to bend slightly around him, just at the periphery of his vision. The faint, almost musical hum he sometimes heard when he was alone. A sound that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. He dismissed them as stress, as his imagination running wild. But now, after reading the forum, they took on a sinister new meaning. He was in his kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water, when he saw it. The stainless steel toaster, usually a dull, slightly smudged surface, gleamed, and within its distorted convex curve, he saw a fleeting image. It wasn't him. It was a shadowy figure, tall and gaunt, standing directly behind him. Its features were indistinct like smoke given form, but its presence was undeniable, radiating a cold, ancient malevolence. David spun around, heart pounding, spilling water onto the counter. Nothing. The kitchen was empty. He looked back at the toaster. It was just a toaster, reflecting the mundane reality of his apartment. Had he imagined it? Was his mind finally snapping? He cleaned up the spill, his hands trembling. But the image was burned into his mind. The forum's words echoed, creeping influence. It wasn't just his reflection that was gone. Something else had taken its place, something that could manifest in the very surfaces that once showed him his own face. The entity wasn't lurking in the shadows, it was lurking within the reflections, using them as its own twisted eyes, its own distorted gateways. David felt a primal terror grip him. He wasn't just missing his reflection. He was being watched, observed, perhaps even followed through these very surfaces. The deal wasn't over. It had only just begun. The silence of his apartment no longer felt empty. It felt pregnant with an unseen presence, a profound, chilling awareness that he was no longer alone, and that whatever had taken his reflection was now reaching for something far more significant. The bargain had stripped him of his image, but it was clear now that the entity craved more than just a visual representation. It wanted his reality. It wanted him. And it was using the very fabric of perception to slowly, inexorably close in. The realization hit Michael like a physical blow, leaving him breathless and cold in the quiet apartment. It wasn't just about the absence of his reflection anymore. It was about the subtle, insidious way the world around him was beginning to warp, to bend to an unseen will. The entity wasn't content with a mere image. It was carving out a space for itself within his very existence, piece by agonizing piece. The first truly unsettling incident came the following morning. He'd placed his keys on the small console table by the door, a habit ingrained over years. He remembered the metallic jingle, the way they'd settled beside the mail. But when he reached for them to leave for work, the table was bare. His mind raced, replaying the memory. Had he put them somewhere else? He searched his pockets, the kitchen counter, even the fridge, a frantic desperation rising in his chest. Finally, exasperated, he returned to the console table. There they were, lying precisely where he recalled placing them, glinting innocently under the hallway light. A cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He hadn't just overlooked them. He had searched that exact spot twice. He knew he had. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next few days, the anomalies escalated from inconvenient to terrifying. He'd leave his coffee mug on his desk, only to find it in the sink a minute later, still warm. Books on his shelf would be rearranged, not subtly, but with a jarring, illogical sequence. A photograph of him and his sister, Emily, taken years ago at the beach, vanished from its frame on his bedside table. He tore his apartment apart looking for it, but it was gone. Then, a week later, it reappeared, not in its frame, but tucked inside a cookbook he rarely used, the edges strangely frayed as if it had been handled roughly. He started documenting these occurrences, scrawling notes in a small journal. The act itself felt absurd, as if he were cataloging the symptoms of a creeping madness. He found himself questioning every memory, every perception. Was he simply losing his mind? The thought was almost a comfort compared to the alternative, that something external, something malevolent, was systematically dismantling his reality. The distortions began to extend beyond his apartment, seeping into his interactions with others. At work, his colleague Sarah approached his desk one afternoon looking perplexed. "Michael, did you send me that email about the project deadline?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "The one with the really strange subject line, 'Time is a flat circle'?" Michael stared at her, genuinely bewildered. "No, Sarah. I haven't sent you anything today. And I definitely wouldn't use that subject line." Sarah pulled up her inbox on her computer, turning the screen to show him. There it was, an email from his address, timestamped just 10 minutes prior, with the eerie subject line she'd quoted. The body of the email was blank. Michael felt a chill crawl up his spine. His fingers trembled as he typed his password, checking his sent folder. Nothing. No trace of the email. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Someone must have spoofed my address." Sarah looked at him skeptically. "It's from your exact address, Michael. And it's not the first time. Yesterday, David mentioned you told him you were taking a week off for a spiritual retreat, in the desert. Said you were going off-grid. Michael's jaw clenched. David was his closest friend, and Michael had spoken to him just yesterday, making plans for dinner next Friday. I never said that to David. I haven't said anything about a retreat. I told him I'd see him for dinner. The conversation left him rattled. He called David immediately. Hey man. Michael began, trying to sound casual. Sarah just told me something weird. Did I say anything to you about a spiritual retreat? There was a pause on the other end. Yeah, dude. You seemed pretty serious about it. Said you needed to realign your chakras or something. I was actually going to ask if you were okay. David's voice held a note of genuine concern. Michael's heart pounded against his ribs. David, I swear I never said that. I remember our conversation perfectly. We talked about dinner next week. We did, David conceded. But then you kinda tacked that on at the end, almost like an afterthought after we hung up. I thought you called me back. Said you decided to go. Michael felt a surge of panic. He hadn't called David back yesterday. He hadn't said any of those things. The entity wasn't just messing with objects. It was tampering with his words, his intentions, his very presence in the lives of others. It was creating an alternate Michael, a phantom self that was subtly eroding his relationships, making him seem erratic, unreliable, perhaps even insane. He started avoiding mirrors again, not just out of habit, but out of a growing dread. The absence of his reflection was no longer a personal oddity. It felt like a gaping wound, an open invitation for the entity to manifest. One evening, as he walked past a storefront window, he caught a glimpse of movement. Instead of the familiar street scene, a fleeting, distorted image flickered in the glass. It wasn't his own face, nor was it a clear image of anyone else. It was a shifting mosaic of shadows and indistinct features, a face that seemed to be comprised of static and fleeting fears, a face that was almost human, but fundamentally wrong. He blinked and it was gone, replaced by the mundane reflection of the street. He dismissed it as a trick of the light, a figment of his overwrought imagination, but the image lingered, a festering seed of terror in his mind. The psychological toll became unbearable. Sleep offered no escape. His dreams were vivid, unsettling tapestries of shifting realities and whispers he couldn't quite decipher. He started to doubt his own memories, questioning if the life he remembered had ever truly happened, or if it was all an elaborate construct. He was losing his grip, and the entity seemed to thrive on his increasing confusion and despair. One night, sitting in the oppressive silence of his apartment, the air thick with an unseen presence, Michael had a terrifying thought. What if the entity wasn't just erasing him, but replacing him? What if the phantom Michael, the one sending bizarre emails and planning imaginary retreats, was slowly becoming more real than he was? The idea was a cold, alien hand clutching at his throat. He was being hollowed out, his identity systematically stripped away, making room for something else to inhabit his shell. He remembered the old man at the antique shop, the one who had facilitated the bargain. He remembered the man's knowing eyes, his cryptic words. Had he understood the true cost? Or was he merely a pawn, an unwitting gatekeeper for this insidious force? Michael knew he had to go back, had to confront the source of this nightmare. He had to understand what he had truly sold, and if there was any way to reclaim it, to reclaim himself, before he vanished entirely. The thought of facing the old man again, of stepping back into that shop where his nightmare began, filled him with a profound terror. But the alternative, fading into nothingness, replaced by a ghost of his own making, was far, far worse. He clutched his journal, the scribbled notes a desperate anchor to his dwindling reality. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the entity was no longer just toying with his perceptions. It was preparing for the final act, the ultimate erasure. And he was running out of time. The certainty of his impending erasure was a cold, hard knot in Michael's gut. The abstract terror had solidified into a concrete deadline, a ticking clock he could almost hear in the frantic beat of his own heart. He couldn't just wait for it to happen. He had to fight, even if he didn't know what he was fighting or how. His mind, usually so orderly and logical, was a whirlwind of panicked thoughts, fragments of half-formed plans, and the chilling echoes of the entity's whispers. He needed answers, and he needed them yesterday. His first desperate urge was to understand the entity itself. What was it? Where did it come from? And what precisely did it mean by erasure? He spent hours hunched over his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard, searching for anything. Any myth, any legend, any obscure folklore that mentioned reflections, deals, or beings that stole identities. He typed in variations of Mansell's reflection, mirror demon, identity theft supernatural, shadow entity. But the search results were a barren wasteland of pop culture references, philosophical musings, and New Age nonsense. Nothing, absolutely nothing, resonated with the terrifying reality he was living. It was as if his predicament was unique, unprecedented, a horror crafted specifically for him. The lack of information only amplified his isolation, confirming that he was truly alone in this nightmare. He even tried searching for the antique shop. He typed in the address he vaguely remembered, the name Curio and Obscura, that had been etched into his memory. But the address led to a vacant lot, and the shop's name yielded no results. It was as if the shop, like his reflection, had merely been a temporary construct, a stage for the initial transaction, now dismantled and vanished without a trace. The realization hit him with a sickening lurch. The entity had meticulously erased its own tracks, leaving Michael stranded on an island of unraveling sanity. The futility of his research gnawed at him, but the encroaching silence of his existence was even worse. He hadn't spoken to anyone substantial in days, not truly. His calls to Sarah had been brief, distracted, filled with a forced cheerfulness that felt like a betrayal of his own crumbling reality. He knew he had to tell someone to break the suffocating secrecy, but the words felt impossible to form. How do you explain that your reflection has been stolen by an invisible entity, and that you're slowly being erased from existence? He imagined the pity, the concern, the inevitable suggestion of therapy, or worse, psychiatric evaluation. But the desperation was becoming too great to ignore. Sarah was his best friend, his anchor. He had to try. He drove to her apartment, the city lights blurring into streaks of abstract color as his mind raced. He rehearsed the conversation in his head, trying to find a way to make it sound less insane, more urgent. He tried to focus on the tangible evidence, the missing reflection, the growing gaps in his memory, the strange incidents. He parked haphazardly and practically bolted to her door, knocking with a frantic urgency that was far from his usual calm demeanor. Sarah opened the door, her brow furrowed with concern. "Michael? What's wrong? You look awful." Her words, though gentle, were a punch to the gut. He could see the worry in her eyes, but also a hint of something else. A guardedness, a subtle distance. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. Something unbelievable. It's about everything." He stepped inside, his hands trembling as he tried to articulate the unspeakable. He started with the antique shop, the thrill of the unique mirror, the strange man, the inexplicable urge to buy it. He described the moment his reflection vanished, the initial confusion, the growing dread. He spoke of the whispers, the shifting perceptions, the way his memories felt like they were being siphoned away. He watched her face carefully, searching for a flicker of understanding, a sign that she believed him. But as he spoke, a strange shift occurred. It wasn't overt disbelief, not outright mockery. Instead, it was a subtle alteration in her expression, a gradual hardening around her eyes, a slight tightening of her lips. When he described the entity, the overwhelming feeling of a presence that was consuming him, she interrupted, her voice softer than he expected, but firm. "Michael," she began, her gaze fixed on him with an unnerving intensity, "I know you've been under a lot of stress lately. Work, right? And you haven't been sleeping, have you? You look exhausted." He shook his head, desperate. "No, Sarah, it's not stress. It's real. My reflection is gone. I'm telling you, something is happening to me." She sighed, a sound filled with a weary compassion that felt patronizing. "Michael, reflections don't just go away. And these memories, these whispers, it sounds like you're really struggling. Have you talked to anyone? A doctor?" "No, you don't understand," he pleaded, his voice rising, bordering on frantic. "It's not in my head. This thing, it's erasing me. My identity, my past, everything. It's preparing for the final act." A flicker of something akin to fear crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by a resolute calm. "Michael, please. You're scaring me. You're not making sense. Maybe you need to rest. Get some real sleep. And then, maybe we can talk about getting you some help, professional help." He stared at her, a cold dread seeping into his bones. It wasn't just disbelief. It was as if the entity had subtly twisted her perception, made his words sound like the ramblings of a broken mind. He saw himself through her eyes, a man unraveling, paranoid, delusional. The entity wasn't just stealing his reflection. It was stealing his credibility, his ability to connect, to be understood. It was sealing him off, isolating him completely. He realized then that seeking help from others was futile. The entity had already won that battle. He left Sarah's apartment with a crushing weight in his chest, the final thread of his hope fraying. The world outside felt colder, sharper, more indifferent. He was truly alone. The manifestations escalated with terrifying speed after that. It wasn't just the mirrors anymore. He'd catch glimpses of his own shadow, distorted and elongated, moving independently, sometimes even reaching out with impossible, spindly fingers before snapping back into place. Objects in his apartment would shift. A book on his nightstand would be on the floor. His keys would disappear from their hook and reappear in a drawer. Whispers, faint and insidious, would slither into his mind when he was alone, just at the edge of hearing, too indistinct to understand, but always present, a constant reminder of the entity's pervasive presence. One morning, he woke to find a framed photograph of him and his parents, taken years ago, lying face down on his dresser. When he picked it up, his own image in the picture was blurred, indistinct, almost like a smudge, while his parents remained perfectly clear. He frantically checked other photos, and in each one, his face was subtly distorted, less defined, slowly fading from the tangible records of his past. It was happening. The erasure was beginning, not just in his mind but in the physical world. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He was losing himself, literally and figuratively. His memories were becoming a patchwork of gaps and uncertainties. He couldn't remember the name of his elementary school principal, or the exact details of his first real job, or even the precise color of his childhood dog. These were not just minor forgotten details. They were fundamental anchors of his identity, now dissolving into mist. He slumped against the wall in his living room, surrounded by the subtle, chilling evidence of his undoing. He was trapped utterly and completely. Tears of sheer terror and despair welled in his eyes, but even as they fell, he felt a strange detachment, as if the emotions weren't entirely his own, as if they were being observed, analyzed by something else. In that moment of profound despair, as his mind teetered on the brink of collapse, a fragmented memory, sharp and jarring, pierced through the fog of his fear. It wasn't a memory of the entity, or of his stolen reflection, but of the antique shop itself, and the strange, unsettling conversation he'd had with the proprietor. He remembered the man's eyes, ancient and knowing, and a particular phrase he'd uttered, almost an aside, when Michael had first admired the mirror. "A thing of profound depth, sir," the man had said, his voice raspy. "And every depth has its price. Not merely coin, but covenants. Covenants." The word had meant little to him at the time, just archaic shopkeeper jargon. But now it resonated with a sinister weight. Covenants. Contracts. Deals. And then another flash, even more vivid. A subtle, almost invisible etching on the ornate frame of the mirror itself, a symbol he'd dismissed as mere decoration. It was a complex, interlocking design, almost like a twisted sigil, not quite familiar, but undeniably deliberate. He had been so focused on the mirror's beauty, on his own reflection, that he hadn't truly looked at the frame, at the subtle details that were part of the whole. A desperate, fragile spark ignited in the suffocating darkness of his mind. If this was a covenant, a deal, then there had to be terms. There had to be conditions. And if there were conditions, maybe, just maybe, there was a way to break them. The symbol on the mirror, the word covenants. These weren't just random details. They were clues, the only breadcrumbs he had in this terrifying wilderness. He had to find out what that symbol meant, what kind of covenant he had unknowingly entered into. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only shot he had left. And he knew with a chilling certainty that he was running out of time. And he knew with a chilling certainty that he was running out of time. The dread that had been a cold knot in his stomach now erupted into a searing panic. Michael threw himself into the digital abyss, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a desperate urgency. He started broad, searching for symbols, ancient pacts, curses involving reflections. The results were a dizzying, useless deluge of occult forums, urban legends, and fringe theories. None of it resonated with the icy, clinical precision of the symbol etched into his memory, The one he'd seen on the strange man's card. The one that now felt branded onto his very being. He narrowed his focus, trying combinations like reflection covenant, shadow entity mirror, identity theft supernatural. Still nothing. The internet, usually a vast ocean of information, felt like a desert, mocking his frantic search with its silence on this particular terror. Hours blurred into a single agonizing smear. The faint glow of his laptop screen was the only light in his darkened apartment, casting long shifting shadows that seemed to dance with his growing paranoia. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, sent a jolt of fear through him. He felt watched, hunted. His eyes burned, his head throbbed, but he couldn't stop. Sleep was an impossible luxury, a surrender he couldn't afford. He tried sketching the symbol, replicating its intricate, almost crystalline lines, the way it seemed to twist back on itself, a serpent devouring its own tail, but not quite. It was more abstract, more mathematical, like a forgotten language designed to trap something fundamental. Frustration mounted, a choking sensation in his throat. He pounded his fist on the desk, the dull ache barely registering. This wasn't working. He needed something more, something beyond the publicly accessible web. He remembered fragments of conversations from his college days, whispers about obscure university departments, reclusive scholars who delved into the forgotten corners of history and myth. There was a name, a faint echo in his memory: Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was a legend in certain academic circles, known for her controversial theories on comparative mythology and prehistory, often dismissed as eccentric, even outright mad, but undeniably brilliant. He started searching for her and, surprisingly, found an old, sparsely updated faculty page for a small, specialized research institute attached to a lesser-known university. Her office hours were listed, along with an email address that looked like it hadn't been checked since the turn of the millennium. He drafted an urgent, rambling email, trying to convey the gravity of his situation without sounding like a complete lunatic. He attached a crude drawing of the symbol. He then called the institute, leaving a series of increasingly desperate voicemails. He knew it was a long shot, but he was beyond rational thought. He was operating on pure primal fear. The next morning, exhausted but wired, Michael decided to go to the institute in person. It was a sprawling Gothic Revival building, tucked away in a quiet, leafy part of the city, seeming to exist in its own pocket of time. He found Dr. Reed's office on the third floor, a dusty, dimly lit space overflowing with ancient texts, maps, and artifacts. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid. Dr. Reed was a woman in her late 60s or early 70s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing behind thick, wire-rimmed glasses. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a tweed jacket despite the mild weather. She looked up from a stack of brittle manuscripts as Michael hesitantly knocked on her open door. "Mr. Holloway, I presume?" Her voice was surprisingly firm, almost gravelly. "Your email was compelling, and your drawing intriguing. Come in." Michael stepped inside, feeling a strange mix of relief and renewed apprehension. He sat on the edge of a creaky wooden chair, his hands fidgeting. He launched into his story, omitting the most unbelievable parts but trying to convey the sheer terror of his situation. He described the man, the offer, the missing reflection, and the growing sense of wrongness. Dr. Reed listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally nodding slowly. When he finished, she leaned back, her gaze distant, as if sifting through centuries of forgotten lore. "The symbol you drew," she began, her voice softer now. "It's not common. Not in any standard occult or alchemical texts, at least not in this exact configuration. But it bears a striking resemblance to glyphs found in certain pre-Sumerian ritual practices, and later, in some obscure Byzantine heresies. They were associated with what some cultures called the consuming echoes." Michael felt a fresh wave of ice-cold dread wash over him. Consuming echoes? Yes. Not demons, not spirits as we typically understand them, Dr. Reed explained, picking up a small, intricately carved bone from her desk, turning it over in her fingers. "Think of them as entities born of pure concept. They exist outside our conventional reality, in the liminal spaces between thought and being. They crave substance, not material wealth, but something far more fundamental. They crave identity." She looked directly at Michael, her eyes piercing. "In many ancient belief systems, the reflection is not merely an image. It is the visual manifestation of the soul, the outward proof of self-awareness, the very anchor of one's identity to the physical world. To lose your reflection is to lose that anchor. It's not just a missing image, it's a severing of yourself from your existence. The symbol you describe, that covenant, as you call it, is not a contract for goods or services. It is a portal, a pipeline. Michael swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. A pipeline for what? For consumption, Mr. Holloway. These entities, the consuming echoes, they feed on identity. They don't want your soul in the theological sense. They want the narrative of your soul. Your memories, your personality, your unique way of perceiving the world, your sense of self. These are all data points. When you sold your reflection, you didn't just give up an image. You opened a conduit for something to begin slowly, systematically, absorbing the very essence of who you are. He felt a cold, clammy sweat break out on his forehead. But why? What do they gain? Existence, Dr. Reed said simply, her voice now a low, chilling whisper. They are echoes, remember? They lack true substance in our reality. By consuming the identities of others piece by piece, they gain a foothold. They become more real. They are not looking to possess you, Mr. Holloway, in the way a spirit might. They are looking to replace you, to wear your identity like a skin, to inhabit your life, to become a more solid version of themselves, fueled by the stolen selfhood of those foolish enough to make such a deal. Michael's blood ran cold. The benefits he'd received, the job, the apartment, the ease, they weren't gifts. They were bait. And the payment wasn't just his reflection. It was him. The feeling you described of losing yourself, of memories fading, of the world feeling less solid, Dr. Reed continued, observing him with clinical detachment. Those are the early stages. The entity is integrating your identity, learning to mimic your patterns, your thoughts. It's not just taking, it's assimilating. Soon you won't just forget who you are, you won't be who you are. You will become merely a vessel, an empty shell, while the echo thrives on your stolen life. A horrifying realization dawned on Michael. The chilling certainty that he was running out of time suddenly took on a terrifying new dimension. It wasn't just time before he lost something. It was time before he lost everything, before he ceased to exist as himself entirely. The frantic search, the sleepless nights, the growing paranoia. These weren't just symptoms of fear. They were the desperate struggles of a self being slowly, meticulously devoured. Is there a way to stop it? Michael finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. To get it back? Dr. Reed leaned forward, her sharp eyes boring into him. Perhaps, but it would be incredibly dangerous. These entities are ancient, cunning, and powerful in their own domain. And the deeper they integrate, the harder it becomes to sever the connection without destroying the host entirely. The symbol is not just a brand, Mr. Holloway. It is a lock. And unlocking it, retrieving what has been absorbed, would require a sacrifice far greater than anything you can imagine. It would mean confronting the echo on its own terms in its own domain. And you, Mr. Holloway, are already half gone. Michael stared at Dr. Thorne, the words echoing in the sterile silence of the office. Half gone. His voice was a raw whisper, barely audible over the frantic thumping of his own heart. What do you mean, half gone? Thorne leaned back, his gaze unwavering, almost pitying. Your reflection, Mr. Holloway, was not merely a copy of your physical form. It was a vessel, a conduit. When you sold it, you didn't just give away an image. You severed a fundamental connection to your own being. The echo, as I call it, absorbed a significant portion of your identity, your memories, your very essence. And it continues to feed on the fragments left behind, slowly but surely consuming what remains. Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones, colder than any winter wind. So the forgetfulness? The feeling of being invisible? That's it, isn't it? Precisely, Thorne confirmed. The less of your essence that remains, the less impact you have on the world around you. Memories of you become hazy, then vanish. Your presence diminishes. Eventually, you would simply cease to exist, not in death but in oblivion. As if you were never here at all. The thought was more terrifying than any physical threat. To be erased. To have existed, loved, lived, only for it all to be undone, forgotten. But you said it's a lock. And there's a key. What is it? What do I have to sacrifice? Thorne sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of impossible knowledge. The echo exists in a unique dimensional pocket, a liminal space that mirrors our own but thrives on the absence of true substance. It's a parasitic entity, born from the collective unconscious need for external validation, for a perfect image. Your reflection, Mr. Holloway, was one such perfect image, ripe for the taking. But I created it, Michael interjected, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. I made the deal. I should be able to undo it. You initiated the transfer, yes, Thorne conceded. But you did not create the echo. It has always been there, lurking, waiting for an opportunity. And now it has grown powerful on your essence. To retrieve what it holds, you must enter its domain. And that, Mr. Holloway, is where the sacrifice comes in. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, thick with unspoken implications. Michael felt a desperate urgency building within him. He needed to know. He had to know. Tell me, Michael urged, his voice tight. No matter what it is. Thorne leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, grave tone. The echo feeds on identity. It thrives on the fragmented memories, the unfulfilled desires, the insecurities that make up the human psyche. To enter its domain, you must be willing to offer something it cannot consume, something that transcends the superficial. You must offer a piece of yourself so fundamental, so intrinsically tied to your core being, that its absorption would be meaningless to the echo, yet utterly devastating to you. Michael frowned, trying to grasp the abstract concept. What kind of piece? My arm? My leg? Thorne shook his head slowly. Physicality is irrelevant to the echo. Craves the intangible. Imagine your most cherished memory, the single moment that defines you, that anchors you to reality, that makes you you. The echo will try to twist it, to consume it. To bypass its defenses, you must willingly surrender that memory, that emotional anchor, to a point where it is no longer yours. You must sever your emotional connection to it, knowing that it will be lost to you forever, even if you succeed. It is a sacrifice of self, not of body. A cold sweat broke out on Michael's forehead. His most cherished memory? He thought of Emily, her laughter the day they met, the birth of their daughter, Sarah. How could he choose? How could he willingly give up something so precious? It would be like losing a part of his soul. And even if I do that, Michael pressed, even if I make that sacrifice, how do I get into this domain? What is it? Some kind of mirror world? Not quite, Thorne explained. It's a reflection of a reflection, a distorted echo of our reality, accessible through specific, highly unstable liminal zones. These zones are usually found where the veil between dimensions is thinnest, often places of profound emotional resonance or intense psychic energy. And yes, mirrors can be a gateway, but not just any mirror. It requires a mirror that has been imbued with a significant amount of human intention. A mirror that has witnessed countless reflections, countless lives. A mirror, ironically, that has absorbed its own kind of fragmented essence over centuries. Michael thought of the old, antique mirror in his grandmother's attic, the one he used to stare into as a child, convinced it held secrets. No, that was just a childhood fantasy. This was far more sinister. You speak of this as if it's a known path, Michael said, a sliver of hope mixed with profound fear. Have others tried this? Thorne's expression grew shadowed. A few, over the centuries, have stumbled upon the echo's influence. Some, like you, made a conscious deal. Others were merely unlucky, their reflections stolen by chance. Most never understood what was happening, fading into oblivion without a trace. A handful, a very select few, came to understand. They sought me out, or those before me. And their fates. He trailed off, the implication clear. Their fates were not good, were they? Michael finished, his voice heavy. Thorne met his gaze directly. To confront the echo is to confront a part of yourself you never knew existed. A part that has been twisted and amplified. It will use your deepest fears, your greatest regrets, your most profound insecurities against you. It will try to break you, to absorb what little essence you have left. The sacrifice is not just the memory, Mr. Holloway. It is the absolute, unyielding will to endure, to resist, even when every fiber of your being screams for release. And if I fail? Michael asked, the question hanging in the air like a death sentence. If you fail, Thorne said, his voice quiet, you will become a permanent part of the echo. Your essence will fuel its existence, your memories will be its playground, and the portal will seal, trapping you forever. You will be truly, irrevocably gone. Michael swallowed hard. The stakes were unimaginable. His life, his very existence depended on this. But what about Emily? Sarah? If he failed, they would forget him entirely. If he succeeded, he would have lost a part of himself, a precious memory, but he would still be. It was an impossible choice, yet no choice at all. He had to try. So what do I need? Michael asked, a newfound resolve hardening his voice, pushing back against the terror. What kind of mirror? And how do I prepare for this journey into its domain? Thorne nodded slowly, a flicker of something akin to respect in his eyes. You will need a mirror of significant antiquity, one that has been exposed to a multitude of human reflections, preferably one with a history of being passed down through generations. The older, the more witnessed, the better. We will need to locate such an artifact. As for preparation, it's not physical, it's psychological. You must identify that core memory, that anchor, and prepare yourself to let it go. To truly, utterly release it. How do I do that? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. How do you willingly erase your own past? It's not erasure, Mr. Holloway, Thorne corrected gently. It's a severing of attachment. The memory will still exist, but your emotional connection to it, your ownership of it, will be gone. Like watching a movie of someone else's life. A life you once knew intimately, but now feel no personal stake in. It is the ultimate act of detachment, a sacrifice of your emotional self to save your existential self. Michael closed his eyes, picturing Sarah's face, Emily's smile. Could he really sever his connection to those moments? Could he willingly sacrifice a piece of his own heart? The pain of merely contemplating it was immense. But the alternative was to vanish completely, to become nothing. And once I'm in this domain, Michael continued, opening his eyes, a fierce determination replacing the fear. How do I get my reflection back? My essence? That, Mr. Holloway, is the trickiest part, Thorne admitted. The echo is a master of illusion, of deception. It will present itself in myriad forms, all designed to disorient and consume you. Your reflection, your true reflection, will be hidden within its core, guarded by its own amplified essence. You will have to identify it, isolate it, and then you will have to claim it back. It will not be a simple retrieval. It will be a battle of wills, a confrontation with your own distorted self. You will have to prove that you are worthy of being whole again, that you have learned the value of your true self, beyond any superficial image. Michael felt a strange mix of terror and grim determination, a battle of wills with his own distorted self. It sounded like a descent into madness. But what other choice did he have? He was already fading, already half gone. This was his only chance. So we need a mirror, Michael stated, more to himself than to Thorne. An old one. And I need to choose what to lose. Thorne watched him, his expression unreadable. It's not just about choosing, Mr. Holloway. It's about accepting the cost, accepting the risk, and accepting that, even if you succeed, you will not be the same man who walked into this office. You will be altered. For better or worse remains to be seen. The weight of those words pressed down on Michael. Altered. Piece of him gone forever. But at least he would still be. At least Emily and Sarah would still remember him. Even if he himself felt a phantom limb where a cherished memory once resided. Where do we find such a mirror? Michael asked, his voice firm, ready to face whatever lay ahead. And how soon can we start? Thorne's lips thinned. Finding the right mirror will be a challenge. It's not something you can simply buy at an antique shop. It needs to have the right resonance, the right history. I have a few contacts, a few leads we can pursue. As for starting, the moment we find it, Mr. Holloway, because time, as you are quickly learning, is not on your side. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office temperature. He was on a clock, a countdown to oblivion. And the only way to stop it was to dive headfirst into the very heart of the nightmare he had created. He had sold his reflection, and now he had to pay the ultimate price to get a piece of himself back. The man who sought perfection now faced the terrifying reality of profound imperfection, a self forever scarred by the pursuit of an impossible image. The journey he knew had just begun, and the real horror he suspected was yet to come. He stumbled backward, a guttural cry tearing from his throat, echoing in the suffocating silence of his bathroom. His hands, shaking violently, flew to the mirror, pressing against the cold glass as if to force an image into existence. Nothing. Just the faint, distorted reflection of the room behind him. A ghostly outline where his own face should have been. He clawed at the surface, his nails scraping, leaving faint, desperate marks on the pristine glass. It was real. This wasn't a nightmare, a trick of light, or a momentary hallucination. His reflection was truly irrevocably gone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He tore away from the bathroom, rushing through his apartment like a madman. Every reflective surface became an enemy, a cruel reminder of his profound absence. He stared into the polished chrome of his toaster, saw only the kitchen behind him. He peered into the dark screen of his phone, glimpsed the faint glow of the ceiling light, but no trace of his own eyes. He even filled a basin with water, splashing his face, then leaning in, hopeful, only to see the swirling patterns of the disturbed liquid, then the blank surface showing the ceiling, the wall, anything but Michael. His mind screamed, a cacophony of fear and disbelief. How could this be? What had he done? The memory of Elias Thorne, the antique shop, the intoxicating promise of perfection, it all crashed down on him, twisting into a grotesque mockery. He had sought to erase a flaw, to perfect an image, and in doing so, he had erased himself. The man who had once obsessed over every tiny imperfection now longed for even the most minute flaw, anything that would confirm his existence. Days bled into a blur of terrified isolation. Michael couldn't bring himself to leave his apartment. The thought of stepping out, of facing the world without a reflection, was a terror he couldn't comprehend. How would he shave? How would he dress? How would he even know if he was truly there? He became a phantom in his own home, moving through rooms with a crippling self-consciousness, constantly checking, constantly hoping, constantly despairing. He started talking to himself, whispering, sometimes shouting, just to hear his own voice, to confirm he was still a tangible entity, not just an empty space where a man used to be. The silence that followed his words always felt like a void, threatening to swallow him whole. He grew gaunt, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep, his once meticulously groomed hair a tangled mess. He avoided windows, fearing that someone might glimpse him, might notice the strange, unsettling lack of his image in the glass. The outside world became a hostile, dangerous place, filled with mirrors and shop windows and the reflective surfaces of passing cars, all ready to confirm his monstrous new reality. But the sheer, crushing weight of his isolation eventually forced a desperate resolve. He had to go back. He had to find Elias Thorne. Only Thorne, he reasoned, could undo this unspeakable horror. Only Thorne knew the true nature of the transaction. One evening, under the cloak of twilight, Michael ventured out. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, sunglasses, and a scarf wrapped high around his neck, hoping to obscure as much of himself as possible. He moved through the city streets like a hunted animal, darting from shadow to shadow, his gaze fixed on the pavement, avoiding all eye contact, all reflective surfaces. The familiar cityscape felt alien, threatening. Every passerby seemed to stare. Every whispered word felt like a judgment. He was convinced they knew, that they could sense the emptiness where his reflection should be. He found the street where Thorne's antique shop had stood, but as he approached the address, a cold dread coiled in his stomach. The shop wasn't there. In its place stood a brightly lit, modern juice bar, its pristine glass front reflecting the neon glow of the street, but offering no hint of the dark, cluttered interior he remembered. Michael stared, bewildered, his heart sinking with each passing second. Had he imagined it? Had the entire encounter been a delusion? A fever dream born of his obsession? He asked a young woman working at the juice bar about the previous establishment. She looked at him with a polite, but utterly blank expression. Antique shop? Sir, this has been a juice bar for at least 5 years. Before that, it was a dry cleaner's. Michael stumbled away, his mind reeling. 5 years. It felt like only weeks ago that he had walked into Thorne's shop. A wave of dizziness washed over him. Was he losing his mind? Was this another consequence of his deal? He wandered the block, desperate, searching for any sign, any faded placard, any forgotten alley that might lead him back to Thorne. Nothing. The street was bustling, vibrant, utterly devoid of the Gothic mystery he remembered. Just as despair threatened to consume him entirely, a flicker of recognition caught his eye. Down a narrow, barely lit alleyway he hadn't noticed before, tucked between a bustling pizzeria and a towering office building, was a small, unassuming door. It was made of dark, aged wood, almost blending into the brickwork, and above it, a barely visible, tarnished brass plaque. He squinted, his breath catching in his throat as he made out the faint, elegant script, "A Thorn Curios and Antiquities." Relief and terror warred within him. He had found it. He pushed the door open, the sound of a faint, distant bell chiming as he stepped into the familiar, oppressive gloom. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, dust, and something else. Something metallic and faintly acrid. The shop was even more cluttered than he remembered. Shelves overflowing with strange artifacts, shadowed corners hiding untold secrets. But it was empty. No Thorn. "Looking for something, Mr. Hayes?" A voice, smooth as polished obsidian, slithered from the shadows. Michael spun around. Elias Thorn emerged from behind a towering stack of ancient tomes, a faint, unsettling smile playing on his lips. He looked precisely as Michael remembered, ageless and impeccably dressed, his eyes glinting with an unnerving intelligence. "Thorn," Michael gasped, his voice raspy. You have to help me. My reflection, it's gone." Thorn merely tilted his head, his smile widening. "Indeed. That was the agreement, wasn't it? A fair exchange. Your reflection for the eradication of all perceived imperfections. And from what I hear, you've been quite pleased with the results, up until recently, of course." "Pleased?" Michael choked out a laugh that was more a sob. "I'm a ghost. I can't see myself, I can't live like this. It's a nightmare." "A nightmare you willingly entered into, Mr. Hayes," Thorn replied, his voice devoid of sympathy. He walked slowly around Michael, his gaze lingering, dissecting. "You desired perfection, an image utterly flawless. And I delivered. Your reflection, the one you so despised, no longer plagues you. It is gone, just as you wished. But I didn't know it would be gone forever," Michael pleaded, desperation etching itself onto his face. I thought you would just alter it, fix it." Thorn chuckled, a dry rustling sound like dead leaves. "Ah, the intricacies of desire. You wished for its removal, its eradication. And that is precisely what happened. Your reflection, Mr. Hayes, is not merely an image. It is a vital tether. A connection to the physical world, to your own self-perception, to the very fabric of your being. It is the visible manifestation of your soul's resonance with reality." Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones. My soul? What have you done?" "I have merely facilitated your desire," Thorn said, picking up a small, intricately carved wooden box from a nearby shelf, running a finger over its smooth surface. "You see, a reflection is not just light bouncing off a surface. It is a mirror of your essence, a constant affirmation of your presence in the world. Without it, the world begins to forget you. And more importantly, you begin to forget yourself." Michael stumbled back, hitting a towering bookcase filled with strange, unlabeled bottles. "Forget myself? What does that mean?" Thorn's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "It means the edges blur, Mr. Hayes. Your memories may fray, your sense of identity will erode. Others, too, will find you less substantial, less memorable, perhaps even harder to perceive at all. You will become, shall we say, increasingly ephemeral." The word struck Michael like physical blows. He wasn't just losing his image, he was losing his very existence. The imperfections he had so desperately sought to erase now seemed like precious anchors, grounding him to reality. "I want it back," Michael whispered, his voice cracking. "Whatever the cost. I want my reflection back." Thorn smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. "The cost, Mr. Hayes, is indeed significant. And a reflection once sold is not easily retrieved, especially not from where I keep them." He gestured vaguely towards the back of the shop, where a heavy iron-bound door, previously unnoticed, seemed to pulse with a faint unseen energy. "But let us not dwell on such matters just yet. You have only just begun to experience the true freedom you purchased. The freedom from the tyranny of your own image. And the real horror, Mr. Hayes, the profound consequence of existing without that vital tether, that is yet to unfold." Michael felt a chilling certainty. Thorn wasn't going to help him. He was enjoying this, relishing Michael's torment. The perfection he had craved was a gilded cage, and now, without his reflection, he was condemned to a slow, terrifying fade into oblivion. He had traded his soul for an illusion, and the true price was only now beginning to be exacted. The journey into profound imperfection, into the terrifying abyss of non-existence, had indeed only just begun. And Thorn, he realized, was not just a merchant of curiosities, but a collector of souls, patiently waiting for his latest acquisition to fully unravel. Michael's world, once vibrant with the promise of self-improvement and newfound purpose, began to fray at the edges, then rapidly unravel at its very core. The initial shock of his missing reflection had morphed into a creeping dread, then solidified into an oppressive, ever-present reality. It wasn't just the mirrors anymore. It was the polished surfaces of his phone screen, the darkened glass of a shop window, even the glossy cover of a magazine. Everywhere he expected to see himself, there was only an emptiness that screamed of his non-existence. His perception of the world began to warp. People seemed to look through him, their eyes unfocused as if he were merely a translucent pane of glass. Conversations felt distant, their words echoing in a cavern he suspected was his own hollowed-out mind. He'd walk into a room, and the air wouldn't shift around him quite right. He'd sit on a couch, and the cushions wouldn't quite indent as they should. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but with each passing day, the world seemed to lose its tactile connection to him, as if he were a ghost haunting his own life. Sarah, his wife, was the first to notice the profound shift. Michael, once a man of robust laughter and an unwavering presence, became withdrawn, his eyes hollowed, his gaze distant. He'd stare blankly at the dinner table, pushing food around his plate, unable to taste or feel the texture of it. Her questions, born of love and concern, were met with irritable grunts or vague, evasive answers. "Are you all right, Michael? You seem transparent." Her words, meant to be metaphorical, struck him with the chilling accuracy of a prophecy. He wasn't just transparent in spirit, he felt transparent in existence. His work, once a source of pride, became an impossible burden. He found it increasingly difficult to focus, his thoughts constantly drifting to the gaping void where his self used to be. Presentations became a nightmare. He'd stand before colleagues, feeling like a phantom, his voice a disembodied echo in the room. He started missing deadlines, making careless errors, and alienating clients with his detached demeanor. His boss, David, a man usually patient and understanding, called him into his office. "Michael, what's going on? You're not yourself. It's like you're not even here." David's concern was genuine, but his words only served to twist the knife deeper into Michael's already wounded psyche. He wasn't there. He was nowhere. Sleep offered no escape. Nightmares plagued him, vivid and terrifying. He'd dream of walking through crowded streets, screaming his name, but no one would turn. He'd reach out to Sarah, but his hands would pass through her like mist. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, the terror of absolute nothingness clinging to him like a shroud, making the waking world feel almost as insubstantial as his dreams. The unraveling was more insidious than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about appearance, it was about identity. He found himself forgetting details about his own life. What was his favorite color? What was the name of his elementary school teacher? He'd look at old photographs, seeing a man who was undeniably him, surrounded by loved ones, but the connection felt tenuous, as if he were looking at a stranger's past. The memories were there, but the feeling of having lived them, the sense of his own self participating in those moments, was fading. He was losing his narrative, his personal history, his very essence. One evening, he sat alone in the living room, the muted glow of the television reflecting in the dark window beside him. He saw the room, the furniture, the faint outline of Sarah moving in the kitchen, but no Michael. He raised a hand, and it simply vanished into the darkness of the glass. A profound, bone-deep panic seized him. He wasn't just losing his reflection, he was losing himself. He was becoming a collection of borrowed memories, an echo of a person who once was. He was becoming nothing. He remembered Thorne's words, spoken with that chilling, knowing smile. "A reflection is more than just an image, Mr. Williams. It is the anchor to your reality, the mirror of your soul. Without it, the self begins to drift." Thorne had warned him. He had warned him. And now Michael understood the true, terrifying depth of that warning. Thorne hadn't just sold him a curiosity. He had sold him a curse, a slow, agonizing erasure. A desperate, primal urge began to stir within him. He had to get it back. He had to reclaim his reflection, no matter the cost. Thorne had implied there was a way, a price to be paid. Michael hadn't understood then, but now, facing the precipice of absolute non-existence, no price seemed too high. His life, his identity, his very soul were slipping through his fingers like sand. He couldn't let it happen. He wouldn't. He started digging through his memory, trying to recall every detail of his encounter with Thorn. The address of the antique shop, shrouded in fog and forgotten by time. The name of the street, the peculiar sign. He felt a flicker of his old determination, a spark of the man he once was, fighting against the encroaching void. This was his last stand, his final desperate attempt to pull himself back from the abyss. He had to find Thorn. He had to confront him. He had to demand his reflection back. Or, he realized with a chilling certainty, there would soon be nothing left of Michael Williams to demand anything at all. The thought spurred him into action, a frantic energy coursing through his increasingly ethereal veins. He had to hurry, before it was too late, before he was no more than a forgotten whisper in the wind. The collector of souls was patient, but Michael knew with a terrifying clarity that his time was rapidly running out. His time was rapidly running out. Michael felt the edges of his vision fray, like old film burning away. The world around him seemed less substantial, less real. He stumbled, his legs feeling like they were made of smoke, but he pushed forward. He had remembered something, a fragment from the forgotten contract, a line that had seemed innocuous then, but now screamed with terrifying significance. He pictured the place in his mind, a forgotten corner of the city, a narrow alleyway where shadows clung even at noon. It was an antique shop, ironically named the Glimmering Glass, crammed with dusty mirrors and tarnished silver frames, a place he'd visited in the hazy euphoria of his initial search for answers. He dismissed it then as just another dead end, but the memory of the shop owner, a man whose eyes seemed to reflect nothing but the deepest void, now chilled him to the bone. The man wasn't just a shop owner, he was a gatekeeper, a facilitator. Or perhaps he was the collector himself in a fleeting corporeal form. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Michael forced his failing body through the labyrinthine streets. Each step was an act of raw will, each breath a struggle against the encroaching emptiness. He could feel the cold tendrils of the collector reaching for him, not physically, but as a creeping dread, a slow erasure of his very being. He saw his hand translucent, almost gone. He had to make it. He finally reached the alley. The Glimmering Glass stood, a skeletal edifice against the setting sun, its dusty windows reflecting only fragmented, distorted light. The sign, once of vibrant gold, was now peeling, revealing the dark wood beneath. He pushed the heavy creaking door open. A faint chime like a dying bell echoed through the cavernous interior. The shop was darker than he remembered, filled with an oppressive silence that swallowed the city's distant hum. Mirrors of all shapes and sizes lined the walls, stacked on shelves, leaning against each other. But none of them reflected him. They only showed the dusty shelves, the decaying furniture, the shadowy corners. His own absence was a gaping hole in every silvered surface. "I knew you'd return, Michael," a voice whispered from the depths of the shop. It wasn't loud, but it resonated in Michael's bones, a sound that was both ancient and utterly devoid of life. It was the shop owner, sitting behind a counter piled high with forgotten trinkets, his face obscured by shadow. His eyes, however, seemed to glow with a faint predatory light. The true nature of your bargain always reveals itself, eventually. Michael stumbled towards the counter, his knees threatening to buckle. "The contract," he gasped, his voice thin and reedy. "It said, until its true nature is unveiled." The figure chuckled, a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Clever, Michael. Most never get that far. Most simply fade, their reflections absorbed into the great void, their identities forgotten. But you clung to the edge. My reflection isn't gone, is it?" Michael pressed, a desperate hope blooming in his chest. "It's held. A silent witness." "Indeed," the collector replied, slowly rising from behind the counter. As he moved, the shadows around him seemed to deepen, to coalesce, forming a vaguely humanoid shape that shimmered at the edges. It wasn't a man. It was an absence given form, a living void. "Your reflection, like all others, exists within the grand tapestry of forgotten selves, a library of faces, a museum of identities, each one held, a testament to the brief flicker of existence its owner once possessed." "But it's my reflection," Michael insisted, finding a surge of strength. "It's a part of me. You can't truly own it. You can only hold it if I allow you to." The collector tilted its head, a gesture that was unsettlingly human. "And how, pray tell, do you propose to reclaim what you willingly forfeited?" You wish to be free of the burden of self-image, of the constant scrutiny of your own face. You surrendered it. The contract is absolute. No, Michael countered, remembering the frantic, sleepless nights of research, the forgotten texts, the cryptic warnings. The contract states until its true nature is unveiled. A reflection isn't just an image. It's a witness. It's the part of us that confirms our existence, not just to ourselves but to the world. It's what anchors us. And your power isn't in taking reflections, but in making us forget them. You don't consume. You facilitate oblivion. The collector's shadowy form seemed to waver, a ripple of unease passing through its ethereal substance. An interesting theory, Michael, but a theory does not undo a binding agreement. But you need me to forget, Michael pressed, his voice growing stronger, his very words an act of defiance against the encroaching emptiness. You need me to cease to be, to truly let go. That's why I'm fading. Not because my reflection is gone, but because I'm losing the memory of it, the belief in it, the acknowledgement that it ever existed. You feed on that forgetting. You feed on the absence of self-recognition. He took a step forward, then another, his translucent hand reaching out. But I haven't forgotten. I remember. I remember every scar, every laugh line, every imperfection that made me me. I remember the way my eyes crinkled when I smiled, the slight crookedness of my nose. I remember the person staring back at me day after day, and that memory, that witness, is still within me. The shop seemed to groan, the mirrors on the walls rattling faintly. The collector's form solidified slightly, its glowing eyes narrowing. You speak with conviction, Michael, but conviction is not power. You are a whisper, a fading echo. You have no strength left to reclaim what you cast aside. My strength isn't in my fading body, Michael declared, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that surprised even himself. It's in my will. It's in the indelible mark of my existence. A reflection doesn't just show you what you look like. It shows you that you are. And I am. I exist. And because I exist, my reflection exists, even if you hold it captive. He scanned the shop, his gaze falling upon a large, ornate mirror at the very back, draped in a velvet cloth. It seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, a subtle shimmer that was different from the dullness of the other mirrors. That's it, isn't it? He whispered, pointing with his ethereal hand. That's where you keep them. The repository of forgotten selves. The collector let out a hiss, a sound like sand blowing across a desert. Its form expanded, filling the space between them, a vortex of swirling shadows and whispered, fragmented identities. Do not trespass, Michael. The consequences will be your absolute annihilation. Annihilation will come anyway if I do nothing, Michael retorted, pushing past the collector's oppressive presence. He walked towards the draped mirror, each step in agony, but fueled by a desperate, burning resolve. He reached out, his hand passing through the collector's form as if it were smoke. The collector recoiled, a shriek of indignation tearing through the air. Michael tore the velvet cloth from the mirror. It was ancient, its silvered surface tarnished with age, but unlike the other mirrors, it didn't reflect the shop. Instead, it showed a swirling, chaotic maelstrom of faces, fleeting glimpses of countless individuals, their eyes wide with confusion, fear, and a terrifying emptiness. It was the collective unconscious of forgotten reflections, a silent scream of lost identities. And then amidst the chaos he saw it, a faint, almost transparent image of his own face, struggling to coalesce, to assert itself against the tide of forgotten others. His reflection was there, trapped but not destroyed. You are not gone, Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out, not to touch the mirror, but to project his will, his memory, his self into it. I remember you. I see you. You are part of me and I am part of you. You are my witness and I am yours. He focused all his remaining strength, all his memories, all his love for Jessica, for his life, for the simple act of existing. He flooded the mirror with the raw, undeniable essence of Michael, the man who had loved, who had feared, who had made mistakes, but who had lived. He poured his entire being, his very soul, into that fragile image. The mirror pulsed with a blinding light. The swirling faces within it screamed, a chorus of despair, as if Michael's act of self-affirmation was disrupting their eternal slumber. The faint image of his own reflection began to solidify, to grow brighter, pushing back against the encroaching chaos. The collector shrieked, a sound of pure agony and rage. Its shadowy form began to dissipate, tearing at the edges, as if being consumed by the very light emanating from the mirror. "No, you cannot. You defy the very nature of the bargain. I unveil its true nature," Michael roared, his voice now strong and resonant, echoing through the shop. His fading body began to solidify, the ethereal veins receding, replaced by the familiar warmth of flesh and blood. "My reflection is not a possession to be sold. It is an extension of my identity, and I reclaim it." With a final explosive burst of light, Michael's reflection surged forward from the mirror, not as a separate entity, but as a wave of self-recognition that washed over him, through him, becoming one with him. He felt a profound sense of completeness, a rush of belonging that he hadn't realized he'd lost until now. The light faded, leaving the shop in a sudden, almost absolute darkness. The collector was gone, dissolved into nothingness, leaving only a lingering scent of ozone and forgotten dreams. Michael stood, breathing deeply, his body whole, his vision clear. He looked at his hands, they were solid, real. He walked to a smaller, unbroken mirror nearby, one that had been obscured by shadows. He looked into it, and there he was, Michael. His face, his eyes, his familiar smile. But it was more than just an image. It was a profound connection, a deep well of self-awareness. He saw not just his physical form, but the culmination of his journey, the terror he had faced, the identity he had fought to reclaim. His reflection now held a depth, a quiet wisdom, that hadn't been there before. It was a witness to his ordeal, a silent testament to the value of self. He had won. He had unveiled the true nature of the bargain, not just for himself, but perhaps for countless others whose reflections still lay trapped in the collector's void. He had found his way back, not just to his reflection but to himself. And as he looked at his face, truly seeing it for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he understood. A reflection isn't something you look at, something you are. It's a silent